Hello Giants fans, welcome to Giants Baseball 101. I'm Gabe Vaughn, your host. The Astros won the World Series 4-2. I knew that was going to happen. Tonight I want to get to the Giants defense because that's been an area that was highly problematic for them in 2022. And if you're a careful listener, what you're going to be thinking is, well, the pitching is not absolved from liability for some parts of the bad Giants season, right? No, it certainly is not, and I'm really not talking about the plays the defense messed up on either. No, I'm saying if the pitching could have been better in certain instances, the Giants could have done better. I'm not saying they got to strike everybody out and the fielders don't have to make their routine plays or even far-reaching to the very ends of their fielding range. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that with poor defense, that doesn't exclude the pitching from giving up the home runs that they've given up, the real, legit, huge hits. That's what I'm talking about. So, there were plenty of earned runs the Giants gave up. Let's just say they gave up plenty of runs that were primarily the pitcher's faults. It's just like all the things that went wrong for the Giants, it's a combination, But just for an example, I mean, to really bring home the point of what I'm talking about with, pitching being a factor even in situations where the defense messes up, just take an episode from the 2020 World Series. And I'm in kind of this conversation with a former MLB player, Mike Kincaid, about it. And Kincaid did not play in the 2020 World Series. He was in the late 90s, early 2000s. But now I'm in a bit of an online conversation about this, and we've each got a differing perspective. And it's about in Game 6 when Rays manager Kevin Cash took Blake Snell out when the Dodgers lineup was about to be up for the third time in the game and Mookie Betts was coming to the plate. Whenever I mention that name, you should immediately think of all the damage that his bat has done to the Giants. But in the 2020 World Series, Blake Snell came out, Nick Anderson came in. That was the decision the Rays decided to make. And it was really for two reasons. One, Anderson was a right-hander, Snell was a lefty, and with the right-hander Betts at the plate, that was what Kevin Cash decided to do. The other reason was just that the Dodgers lineup was coming up for the third time. What happened, though, was Betts hit a double off Anderson, and then basically the Dodgers ended up getting 2 runs. The Rays had previously had a 1-run lead, but the Dodgers took a 2-1 lead in that game. And I was saying, basically, Blake Snell never should have been taken out of that game. But Mike Kincaid responded by saying that I didn't tell the full story because after the double by Betts, Mike Zunino he didn't block this curveball from Anderson that was pretty easy to block, and then Austin Barnes, the catcher, who was on third base, he came home, and then there was a sacrifice fly that brought Betts home. He had been moved to third on the pass ball by Mike Zunino. And his contention is that Barnes, being a catcher and not a good runner, wouldn't have even attempted to take home on the sacrifice fly if it had been him who was on third. But he came home on the pass ball by Mike Zunino, and that gave Betts the opportunity, being a faster runner, to take home on the sacrifice fly. And so if it weren't for Mike Zunino's pass ball, then Nick Anderson would have gotten out of the inning. And that's all. I responded by saying, yeah, that's all fair enough, because it certainly is. But I went on to say that if the double by Mookie Betts could have been prevented, that would have been the best thing. And just that there was no reason that Blake Snell should have come out of the game. I mean, usually when you see a starter and he's got all of his stuff in, and it looks like left to himself he might go 9 innings, the best thing to do is typically to leave him in. I mean, that thing with wanting to bring in Anderson and sometimes going to the bullpen kind of aggressively can help things, but when your starter just has all of his stuff like that, and he's just dialed in. I mean, Snell gave up this single to Austin Barnes, and then he came right out of that game against the Dodgers. And I was saying basically that shouldn't have happened. I still think that. And Nick Anderson had struggled in the postseason up to that point. And although he'd been great in the regular season, sometimes managers have to just notice those kinds of things, even with usually great pitchers, just like Astros manager A.J. Hinch did with his closer, Ken Giles, in 2017 when Giles was struggling. So that was my contention, that basically that was fair enough, but the best way to prevent Betts from hitting that double in the first place, the best bet would have been to leave Snell in the game, all information considered. And I strongly think that, and you just take an extreme situation like that, but in reality it can play out over the course of a season too. Still, all of this being the case, and all of the times where you can blame the pitching, even with the defense being at fault, you do have to realize still that bad defense is a serious issue for a team. So I'm sorry if that was pretty hard to follow, but anyway, I got my point in here that it's all an issue. Bad defense is bad, but that wouldn't excuse bad pitching strategies. And in the Giants' case, over the course of the 2022 season, I'm not sure that their pitching strategy was bad. I think that basically it's just they didn't have the core stuff to really make up for the defense when it struggled. I mean, even if the defense had been a little bit better, it's not like they had the great starting rotation that they thought they were going to have in spring training, or that the bullpen was that way either. And certainly in some critical situations, it's certainly not like the bullpen was the way the Giants would have wanted to have it. And I think notably of Tyler Rogers, he didn't have as great of a season as he had in 2021. I mean, he wasn't bad, but you'd probably want a bit better, right? But all of that being the case, and what they would need to look for on the pitching, still, it's not going to be a good idea to get distracted from the defense, because the point is the defense was an issue for the Giants in 2022. And they're going to want to look at it. It really looks like they're going to look at that issue on the free agent market. And what you look for? Well, here's the question. What's different about looking for great defense than offense? Well, the main thing I can think of that's different is that defense, I believe, tends to be a little more consistent. Like if let's say you got a player who's like, he's a great hitter and a great defensive player too. If he slumps at the plate, I think he's more likely not to carry his slump into the field with him. What I'm saying is that defense, I think if it's good, it tends to slump a bit less. I think the real level of performance on defense tends to be more consistent than it is when a guy's at the plate. Now, that doesn't mean defense never slumps. That's certainly not what I'm saying. Or that fielding range never shrinks a bit for a player. Or that they stop making accurate throws. Or just that their glove, getting the ball in the glove, they don't have issues with it. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying I think overall it is more consistent than bats are, than bats tend to be. That it just has a higher closeness to what you expect to see a guy do. So the way the Giants are looking at this on the free agent market, I think if they see some guys who were real good defenders last year and over the course of their careers, I think it's going to be a pretty safe bet that they will play good defense if signed. I think it's one of the areas where the Giants can expect to be right. However, nothing's going to be a substitute for having guys who can hit. I mentioned defense was more consistent than offense, and if you're looking at that on the free agent market, you can expect to be right, but if you compromise relative certainty of having players that will produce with the bat, excuse me, that could be another problem. If they signed a guy who would win the Gold Glove Award and yet would only hit .220 with certainly not enough home runs and extra bases, not enough power for the Giants in 2023, then, well, one or two guys like that shouldn't be a problem, but they're going to need to score some runs here. So they're likely to be right about evaluating defenders, but if they get too distracted from offensive performance, then they could just go around signing guys who were mediocre offensively in 2022, and the 2023 season could be another one where they have lineups where basically you just can't consistently produce and you get shut out a lot, and then how's the pitching going to do? Well, I don't know. That's the other part, and I already kind of talked about that a little bit. But I like the idea of guys like Trey Turner and Carlos Correa who've proven that they can do both. Use the bat and use the glove. So the good news is that guys like them, they're the guys the Giants are really thinking about signing. And they're both options at shortstop. Obviously, that's not the only place the Giants have to look. There is the outfield, and there's just a lot of positions that are going to need to be filled, and they will need to look for quality defenders, but we have to keep that lineup stocked as well with hitters who can do stuff with the bat. And then again, the whole idea, it's not going to be like the whole thing just to get a bit younger as a team, because if you were really taking that to an extreme, it would just be the prospects carry it. That's not the way it can really work here, but if I understand it correctly, what people mean when they say that is that the Giants are just looking for that as a real way to carry their team as a whole, not necessarily in the organization, but with the free agents they sign or the guys that they might trade for. So I think if understood correctly, it really could be a way to get the Giants team back into athleticism, and just that there's definitely going to have to be balance here, but definitely they'll have to be better than the past few off seasons where they do go after the best players. Thank you for watching. This has been Giants Baseball 101. Please subscribe if you haven't. Also, I would love to answer any questions you would want to leave in the comments. I'll see you next week. You know how this works. Have a great night.